Thank you for joining us. Want to give a little bit of context before I hand it off to my colleagues today. So there's a group of faculty that are working on some summer working groups, and they're interested in thinking of, this particular group is interested in thinking about engagement with students, right? We need to think about the relationship that the faculty and our community are forging with our new students, our continuing students, and our transfer students throughout the year, right? Considering that we're in this global pandemic, there's many different insecurities that students have, and they're experiencing different needs and wants, and the reason to return to campus are varied. So I'd like to pass it off to Professor Aisha Sheikh to kind of take us away and start us off today.
Thanks, Gil. This quote by Toni Morrison helps ground the approach of our summer working group. So I want to start with the quote. "There is no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, no room for fear. We speak, we write, we do language. That is how civilizations heal. I know the world is bruised and bleeding, and though it is important not to ignore its pain, it is also critical to refuse to succumb to its malevolence. Like failure, chaos contains information that can lead to knowledge, even wisdom, like art." So the disruption of this pandemic has really forced us into a situation where we had to move very quickly into a remote learning environment with very little planning. This specific time in history has been filled with uncertainty and doubt for all of us, but it creates an opportunity, an opening for an ongoing dialogue with our students, an opportunity for us to think about how this historic moment has shaped all of us. We have an opportunity to think about how we teach and discover ways to meaningfully engage our students in the learning process during this time, while taking into account the inevitable traumas that this pandemic has introduced into all of our lives. Adapting our courses to this very specific situation is not just a matter of replicating the content that we normally deliver in our classroom, but acknowledging the changes that have occurred within the past months, and then incorporating our students' experiences into that learning process. We risk our students leaving Whittier College to learn content elsewhere if we only focus on content as we plan for the new year. It's incumbent upon us to really think about how we can best engage our students so that they get the most out of their Whittier College education during this important moment in history. This creates a crucial opportunity for all of us to reimagine our pedagogies in ways that deliver the best experience we can to all of our students. And engagement is a really key piece of that. So our summer working group will be talking with you today about how we might best do this.
Great. Thank you, Aisha. Alex and Dan, so let's start off and let's get into a little bit of this, all right? So let's start with kind of the question that everybody's thinking about, at least everybody on this group. How can we build community with our students during a pandemic?
Thanks, Gil. So we conceptualized the act of community formation as taking place in 3 different spheres that you can see listed on this slide: the classroom, the campus, and the larger Whittier community. And in a sense, you can think of these as concentric circles, with the classroom as the smallest starting point that's most directly under our control as faculty, although of course each of them has resonances throughout all the different layers. So what I'll do is I'll briefly take you through each of the sectors we've outlined here and give you some concrete suggestions and ideas for community building on each level. So beginning in the classroom, our first recommendation is to survey. Check in with your students about their home and their life circumstances. Are they working long hours? Are they serving as caretakers for a loved one? Do they have regular access to a working computer with internet? This is, of course, a basic tenet of engagement, but it's also an important aspect of each student feeling heard and accounted for in these unusual circumstances. In the same arena, perhaps collectively brainstorming with your students in terms of class policies and what might make sense for everyone, especially in the hybrid model where we're using remote technologies, can help them feel more invested and like they have more agency and self-determination, which are both necessary precursors to feeling like a valued member of the classroom community. We also encourage the act of familiarization, so encouraging quote-unquote face-to-face participation, even if it's through Zoom in your synchronous class meetings, or creating videos, introductory videos on the part of the students. There are tools like Flipgrid that can help just show everyone's faces all together, and just that simple act of visualization can be a very powerful community builder. And also the idea of pairing classroom students who are present with us in person, with those students who are remote or at home. This can be in the context of group work, or it can even really just be to check in on one another. That can be a really great way to have the students feel like they are part of a community. And finally, specifically in the classroom sphere, we talked about the idea of empowering the students, and that can look many different ways, of course. Our recommendations are to reduce cognitive load wherever possible. Research shows that most of our default teaching practices have sort of unnecessary tax on our cognitive processing. And so looking at what is really necessary can help students focus on the important content, both in terms of what you're actually teaching and how you're delivering it. And then we also talked about the idea of creating an instructor-free online space for your students to actually be able to form a community among themselves, where you're not moderating, you're not interfering. This can happen in something like a Moodle discussion board or a Slack channel. There are various technologies for this sort of thing. So moving to the campus sphere, the big recommendations, the subheadings that we have are incentivize and mentor. Let me just explain a little bit about each of those. So the idea of incentivizing, maybe even more than usual, offering extra credit for your students to participate in campus activities, whether those campus activities are in person or remote. And then maybe creating some opportunities for the students to interact with one another remotely while they're participating. So one example we came up with would be, for example, like live tweeting a student life event that your class is attending, or that several students from your class are attending. Could help create a sense of community as they're participating in this, both within their classroom relationships and also connected to the broader community. And then the idea of mentorship among the students. So pairing, for example, older students within a given department or discipline with maybe a lower division class, so that they can kind of help share their wisdom and guide the younger students through what they might be encountering in that discipline, as a way to foster engagement, but also a sense of campus-wide community. And finally, we spoke a little bit about the idea of faculty within their own classrooms creating kind of buddy systems for first-year students, maybe students who are, maybe transfer students, students who are still gaining their footing on the Whittier campus. And again, this can happen in the context of doing actual classwork, or it can sort of be like an extra credit incentive. And finally, our third and widest sphere, the sphere of the Whittier community at large. And our big recommendations here, we call them develop and educate. And what we saw as promising opportunities here would be to identify either individual faculty members or working together, the current and most pressing needs of various community organizations, local businesses, civic agencies, and then seeing how we can bring those things into our classrooms. Can we design curriculums that would provide support in those areas? Can we have students, can we have a marketing class help a business develop their website? Can we somehow get our students involved with what's happening in the community at large? And then the educate piece of it was a kind of call to students to become active and participate in activities and programs that are related to all the things that our world is experiencing right now and our nation. So the coronavirus pandemic, Black Lives Matter movement, upcoming presidential election. Those are all things that are happening, and it creates community for us to acknowledge them, not to ignore them, but to bring them to our students, and then to encourage them to participate, to inform themselves, and perhaps even to develop and promote resources for other folks to educate themselves on some of these important issues as well, either within the context of a class curriculum or as an extracurricular activity. So that's kind of the basic rundown of what we came up with. And Dan, do you have anything to add in this concept of community building?
Thanks, Alex. And I'm Dan of Business Administration. As you heard earlier, our segment has focused on community engagement, specifically engagement with each other as faculty and staff, engagement with and between our students, and perhaps most challenging and significantly, engagement with the city where we teach and learn. We began with the premise that the new normal at Whittier College provides us with a unique and timely opportunity to redefine our community. We believe that learning success in the new normal, and it is the new normal at Whittier College, will be largely determined by how successfully we engage students and ourselves at 3 levels. Alex did a great job at talking about the 3 levels. I want to focus on the 3rd level, which I believe is the most challenging. We have to rethink and pursue what we define as community. This city is both our host and our partner, and we have coexisted with it for more than a century. But our city is waking up to the realities of the new normal and can draw strength from our college. I'm a longtime Whittier resident, and it is clear that this community, like the communities that our students commute from or call home, are also struggling to keep afloat socially and economically. Yes, we've had some past successes with community engagement projects, where students were engaged on a project, working in Whittier, or perhaps even doing an internship for credit. The reality is that our students represent a vital resource. Our local small businesses, our non-government organizations, our service groups, and public agencies are all trying to figure out how to resurface and evolve, and our students can help. There's never been a greater need or time for this college to redefine and re-energize itself via innovative and hybrid approaches to community engagement. Alex and I thank you, and we look forward to working with you via the virtual workshops that you will hear more about in the very short term. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex and Dan. And one of the things that I think is really important to think about is this idea of forging a relationship between faculty and students. All right, the faculty and the students, we know from the national surveys that the college participates and is involved in contributing data for the National Student Survey of Engagement and the Beginning College Student Survey of Engagement. We know that the sooner that the faculty and the students connect, the more meaningful and impactful their relationships are over the entire length of their careers at the college. So I think the points that Alex raised at the beginning of her section are really important to think about, that kind of pedagogical connection between student and faculty to kind of carry them and begin and initiate the relationship. And then thinking about what Dan is proposing, how can the faculty think about the community, the greater Whittier community, as an opportunity for to become a classroom, to become a venue? Because we know that if the students connect with the faculty, they'll be able to use the greater community as a place that they will invest their time and energies into. Okay, so now we have our next question. We have Julie and Christy. How can we best adapt our engagement strategies to online and hybrid learning environments?
Thanks, Gil. So this is Julie from the Sociology and Anthropology Department. And we really agree that building relationships is critical. So faculty can build relationships with students in synchronous and hybrid and online environments, but we really need to be intentional about it. So we need to actually build relationship building into our syllabi. And so we can do things like before class starts, sharing get to know you videos with our students. We can encourage our students to share get to know you videos with us and with each other. During the first week of classes, we can also be intentional about relationship building in our syllabi by having students meet with us one-on-one in small classes or with larger classes, having students in groups meet with the faculty member. Again, building those relationships between faculty and students needs to be intentional. We need to think about having our syllabi reflect that goal.
Right. And in addition to student-faculty engagement, it's really important to consider the student-to-student engagement and the community building that is necessary in a classroom in order to ensure student success. And one of the ways that we've been talking about this is using what we already have and adapting it appropriately to an online setting. So we've been saying the goal is adaptation, not replication. And so most of us already utilize a variety of engaging classroom strategies, so the bulk of the work should come from taking what we're already doing and just adapting them to be online in a way that works for our students. So for example, our in-class discussions, we can use to connect in-person students with our online-only students by strategically pairing in-person and remote students and allowing them to use video chats or phone calls or whatever their method that they prefer is to connect. And so this might be particularly helpful like in a lab situation, which is where I kind of started thinking about the idea a little bit more. I teach biomechanics, and in that case, the in-person student can use the equipment that they have in the lab and go through the hands-on portion of the lab, and they can have the remote student, like maybe in a video chat using Snap or FaceTime or whatever they feel comfortable using. And that other student is on the other end of the video call as they go through using the equipment. So the remote student can still see the equipment being used, but the in-person student is one collecting the data. So then they can just send that data off to the remote student, and then they can work together as a kind of regular partner as they would in a lab to get through the data and answer any questions or assignments. And so that way we can work through the lab assignments together, building that engagement within the classroom, just as they may in a traditional setting.
Great. Great ideas, great suggestions. I'm really, what I'm really appreciative of is trying to find ways to think about putting the work onto the faculty to curate the engagement piece. So I'm wondering how the two of you could address this idea of, with these 7-week modules that the students will be taking their courses in during the 2020-21 academic year. I'm wondering, how do we think about engagement during a 7-week learning opportunity?
So as we know, 7 weeks is going to go by. And so are suggesting that first
Okay, it seems like we're losing Julie a little bit. Chris, did you want to address this point?
Yeah, so what Julie was getting at that we talked a lot about is that early assessment is critical. So during the 7-week period, we have to keep in mind that we only have 7 weeks. So each week that we work with is basically 2 weeks in a regular semester. And so faculty need to understand how their students are learning, and then students need to understand faculty expectations. And that's really important to set up early and remind students often. So a graded assignment by the end of the first week would allow all students to get a sense of how they're doing. And then faculty can reach out to students who may be struggling a little bit early. Signs might be, a missing assignment in week 1, or a grade below a 75%, or whatever threshold you as the professor set up. And then during week 2, the faculty can reach out to those students and offer support to them. And so this is relationship-based teaching, and is especially important for our first-year students and our transfers. So they're just taking 2 classes. So if they're doing poorly in one, these new students might be asking themselves, am I college material? And the answer is yes, but we need to provide those early assignments and that early feedback to allow students that empowerment to know that they are college material. And so that way we can offer early interventions and support when it's needed. And our current historical moment may also be competing for their attention. Students may be facing death in the family, a parent losing a job, the election might throw them off a little bit. And so while we're competing with their attention, we need to build those relationships, again, early and often, having those early assessments and checking in on students when they're struggling. And I'd also like to add that for content in general, we really need to be cognizant of that time limitations. So like I mentioned before, that 7 weeks it's gonna fly by. And so you need to keep that in the front of your mind as you're working through your content to decide what content you'll deliver, how you'll deliver it, and how often you'll be moving forward with your content as you plan your way through the semester.
Cool. Just checking in, Julie, while we have you, I don't know, do you want to throw something out or?
Christy said it really well, everything I would say.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, I think it's really important to think about the faculty's role in kind of our responsibility a little bit more. That a lot of times when we think about the triage that kind of happens around student engagement, a lot of times the faculty will ask for outside help because the semesters can be really long. So this is a good way for us to think about how we can kind of support both the outside support from the Poet Early Alert program and the Center for Advising and Academic Success and Student Life. We can think about all of our campus partners, and we can think about kind of our particular opportunity as the people who spend the most time with students, right? Whether it's online or in person, we spend more time with the students than anybody else. So if we use these assignments as assessments, we might be able to kind of capture some of the needs that our students are experiencing early on. Okay, so as Aisha noted at the beginning, we're in a time of uncertainty and doubt, and our students might be facing a lot of complexities and trauma throughout the academic year. So I'd like to ask Jennifer if she can talk about how can we understand the impact of trauma within our learning communities.
Thank you, Gil. So I'd like to start with this quote. In his 2020 book, Radical Hope, Kevin Gannon writes, "Teaching is a radical act of hope. It is an assertion of faith in a better future in an increasingly uncertain and fraught present. It is a commitment to that future, even if we can't clearly discern its shape." And as educators, as much as we may identify with Gannon's sentiments, there is another ubiquitous quote that says, "We cannot give away what we do not have ourselves." In order to teach as a radical act of hope, we need to feel hopeful and to believe in the process of hoping. We need to model caring for our students in the classroom by caring for ourselves and by being aware of our own limitations, particularly as informed by trauma. The Substance Abuse and Medical Health Services Administration in 2019 defined trauma as resulting from an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. I think this definition is important because it highlights the word experience. Our brain is concerned with minimizing danger. If the brain feels danger on any conscious or unconscious level, the brain disengages, and that disengagement impacts our ability to learn, and I would also argue our ability to teach. As we prepare to engage our traumatized students, we must not forget to ask ourselves how trauma is playing out in our own lives. Trauma can be expressed in physical, emotional, behavioral, or cognitive reactions. Any of these reactions are going to impact our ability to teach and our students' ability to learn. When we experience high levels of stress, the brain releases cortisol, which alters our circadian rhythms, creating too much inflammation, which leads to brain cell destruction. Whether we want this to be happening or not, it happens. Chronic stress, because of the high levels of cortisol, makes it harder for us to remember. During trauma, individuals have decreased attention spans. Trauma impairs our ability to make decisions, remember, and learn. So within our classrooms, because of this, students may have a hard time tracking changes. Students may have a hard time prioritizing multiple assignments. Students may have a hard time engaging with classmates or the material. Students may have a hard time managing their time. And students may have a hard time not quitting or not conceiving of themselves as, Christy said, college material.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. So now, these are really important things for us to think about, right? But Chuck, what I'd like to ask you is if you could provide some ideas about how we can adapt our teaching to support our traumatized students.
In trauma-informed teaching, there are 4 areas of primary focus. One is informing. That means respecting and engaging students about reactions to trauma. Second, connecting, focusing on relationships and guiding the classroom community. Third, protecting, promoting safety and empathy. And redirecting, which means reinforcing learning and encouraging skill-building competencies. To help students cope with stress, faculty need to create an experience of connection and care, including communication, compassion, structure, and flexibility. And what this means is that students may not be able to absorb as much content, and may not be able to do as many long assignments in a shorter time frame while under stress. So we need to think about what content is essential and focus more on process. We may need to make shorter assignments, maybe more shorter assignments rather than one long one. In addition, students may vary in when and how they can participate, whether it's in person, online, asynchronously, synchronously, and they feel more engaged when they have choice about how they learn. So if you can give them the option of being in class if they can, remote if they can't join a Zoom meeting, can they watch a recording of the Zoom meeting? Give them options that can meet their changing needs. Students need to have clear expectations, and they need to be repeatedly reminded when under stress. In other words, they cope with stress better when there's structure, and you can help provide that structure repeatedly. But instructors need to be flexible in accommodating things that happen in students' lives, but students still need to be held accountable have them inform the instructor when they miss assignments, require them to make up missed work. So they still need to do the work, but we need to be flexible in accommodating the challenge that they have when they try to do the work. And it was already mentioned, it's important to assess their engagement early in the course. So those with low participation or low performance can be contacted individually to determine what encouragement, what accommodations, or what referrals to campus resources are needed. If exams are used, it's better to have several lower stake quizzes, maybe once a week, to keep students on track instead of 1 or 2 high stakes exams that are high stress. And open book and open note exams are easier to cope with under stress. We need to promote a culture of care. Students, one way of doing this is by asking them questions that promotes their self-care. Things like, what are you doing to cope with stress? What are you doing for recreation? What are you doing for exercise? How are you keeping in contact with family and friends? So you might ask a question like this at the beginning of class to get them all engaged. If it's a small class, you might call on them individually to promote that personal attention. You might also give some examples of how you're coping with stress to make it much more personal, because it's a personal relationship. That's why students come to Whittier College, because they want these personal relationships. We have a series of workshops coming up to address each of the things that my colleagues and I have talked about. And in those workshops, you'll have an opportunity to talk with your colleagues about specific kinds of assignments that can be utilized in trauma-informed classrooms.
Thank you, Chuck. There were some really important guiding principles and practices that you all shared with us today. So thank you so much for that. I just want to give a few takeaways for faculty to remember as we move into the next academic year based on what you just heard today. So first, do your best to be socially present. And that will take extra effort since we're not going to be in a completely in-person environment. Second, remember that adaptation in our teaching is not simply replication of what we normally would do in person. So we do need to adapt our teaching to this new environment that we're in. And finally, remember to approach your students with care and compassion. All of this is going to require all of us to be very flexible in our teaching so we can offer our students the greatest opportunities that they have for success. We hope that you will join us for these workshops that are coming up, and these should be engaging and interactive experiences. We presented this asynchronous version of our class, and now the hands-on portion is coming up with the upcoming workshops, so please do join us for those. Each of the workshops will also be accompanied by handouts that are available on our Moodle page and that I'll also be sending through email as well. So please join us for these, and we look forward to seeing you there. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I really want to thank everybody for all the work that you've done. Everybody in the group has done a tremendous amount of research and spent a lot of time thinking about these things. And I think that this is an opportunity for us to have these resources that we can always go back to. It's an opportunity for us to recalibrate and kind of reimagine our approaches to teaching and our approaches to learning, and maybe thinking a little bit more about the student's perspective. So I just want to thank all of the panelists today. Thank you for your time. This has been a really invigorating opportunity for me to listen to all of your expertise and your sharing of all your knowledge and all the research that you've learned over the last few weeks. So thank you, everybody.